And as men, we have been convinced that what we need to do in the world is act and fix and do and build process and make structure and do things. And you know what? Most of the time, especially in a relationship with your spouse or with your partner, what is really they're looking for is presence. They're not looking for anything else other than you just being present.
You got to tell that to my 6-year-old daughter. She always loves, she goes, Dad, what's the plan? And I go, beautiful, we're just going to be. we're just going to be, and
let me explain what I just said. So Hector, when I say that just presence is required, let me give you like a really specific scenario. So like I said, I've been married for 22 years. And for a lot of my marriage, there was this very confusing condition there where my wife and I would have a challenge and she would say, I wish you would see me. I wish you would hear me. She didn't feel seen. She didn't feel heard. She was actually saying that. And Hector was so frustrating. I remember thinking, like, I see you, I hear you, we're together all the time. I don't understand. And then finally, through doing massive amounts of research, through really studying this stuff, through looking at like not just modern things, but like Tantra and Taoism and like the belief systems that have been around for relationships since the beginning of time, and really studying the masculine and feminine. Here's what I found. For us as men, if we want our partner to feel fully seen and heard, we need to create presence. And here's what I used to do. My wife would have an emotional reaction. This is why she didn't feel seen and heard. Katie would have an emotional reaction. As a man, I feel threatened by emotions. Most of us do. We've all been told we shouldn't feel. We've all been told we shouldn't have emotions. And so I'd be listening to her having her emotions. And my first thought, like I can admit it now, I wouldn't admit it back then. I didn't even really understand it. But my first thought was, how do I fix this? Can you relate to that, Hector?
Oh, yeah. There was no, I didn't know any other way.
How fast can I make this go away? That really was like the thought, right? And so here my wife is having an emotional reaction. There's something wrong. There's something challenged. She wants to be seen. She wants to be heard. And immediately I'm trying to fix it. And if fixing it didn't work, then I try and build process around it so it never happened again. And if process around it didn't happen, I felt threatened. I felt insecure. So I would withdraw. And if withdraw didn't work, then I'd get angry. By the way, fixing it turns her into a project. Building a process turns her into a project. Withdrawing turns her like into something that you don't want to be around. And getting angry turns her into the enemy. Not one of those things lets her feel seen. So here's what I like discovered. Like, holy shit, why hasn't anybody told this as men, to us as men? What I discovered was when Katie has an emotional reaction, it's an opportunity, like a massive opportunity. Because what I do now is, first, to be honest with you, it kind of gets me excited. But let me take you back to the first time this happened. I created the hypothesis that if I can sit in my wife's emotions with her and help her process and just be present and just be aware and not react, that things would change. So I entered into the situation with the expectation that if I'm present and aware, things are going to change. And I remember the first time it happened, Katie was having an emotional reaction. And I remember talking to myself and saying like, okay, breathe. There's no threat here. There's no woolly mammoth. You do not need to react. You do not need to get activated. And I sat there, and as she was talking, I breathed. I let what she was saying, I didn't deny it. I didn't suppress it. I didn't deflect it. I let it come over me and I breathed and I processed in the moment. And I stayed in my body and I asked her, how does that feel? Is there anything else coming up for you? And sometimes, Hector, early on, there was things she was telling me about me. Things that I really didn't want to hear, but God, I wanted her to be seen and heard. And so regardless of what she said, I validated and I accepted. And when she said, there's times where you didn't make me feel seen and heard, I validated. I said, you're probably right. She said, there's times where you've been really mean and you've been violent, you've been angry and you've been loud and it scared me. I said, I'm so sorry. You're absolutely right. There's times where you've really not been the person I wanted to be in a relationship. You're right. All of those things are absolutely valid. So I sat there and I validated. I didn't fix. I didn't build process. I didn't withdraw. I didn't get angry. I listened. And then as the conversation continued, I kept asking her, tell me more. Is there anything else you wanted to say? Is there anything else coming up for you? What else is going on? And she got to the point where she said, there's nothing left. I've explained it all. And so I just one more time would ask, are you sure there's nothing else? And she'd say yes. And then Hector, I asked this question that completely blew me away. I'm like, okay, we talked about a lot of things. What out of the things that we've talked about do we need to handle or do something about? She said nothing. And in the past, I would have inventoried 15 things that I needed to go work on. And I would have done them without telling her. I'm just trying to be the good guy. I'm trying to please her, to make things right, to fix things. And these days, when we go through that conversation, 90% of the time or more, when she's having an emotional reaction and I provide masculine containment, there's nothing else needed. And as men, we don't understand that, like, hey, you can just be and everything will get better. And what happens when you do that, like you sit there in the emotions, you listen to all of it, your spouse, your partner will finally feel seen and heard. And that is more regulating and more calming than anything else. Because as human beings, like, I want us to all understand something. We all have the childhood wound of not being seen, not being heard, not being acknowledged, not feeling good enough, not feeling like we're enough. And so here's what happens. The payoff is actually for you, for the man, like in the most dramatic way. Because if you're willing to sit there with your spouse as she's having a reaction, if you're willing to process in the moment, if you're willing to like really feel the feelings and stay there with her, when she says there's nothing else left and there's nothing you need to do, you will feel a masculine energy in your body that you maybe have never felt before. And it's like, in the modern world, we talk about how men don't have an initiation. We don't go out into the woods and get like our hand put in like fire ants or anything like what ancient tribes used to do. But what if the initiation that we all feel like we're missing is sitting right in front of us? What if the initiation is actually becoming the person who creates emotional regulation in your relationship? What if the initiation is processing all of your shit, getting the triggers out of the way so that you can be present and aware and in the moment with somebody? That is an initiation that will create more progress, more growth, more personal development in your life than just about anything else. But as men, we're not taught that. The modern world doesn't tell us that. The modern world actually has told us, hey, you have feelings and you have wounding. Feel your feelings, feel your wounding, but that's it. And so when I go out into the world and I look at like so many of these men's coaches that are like screaming and yelling at men to become more masculine by getting yelled and screamed at, it's like, wait a second, like we're in a world of a bunch of men who've discovered their wounding, but haven't discovered the solution. And they're sharing from the wound, which is crazy relatable and gets a lot of likes and a lot of attention, but it keeps us all stuck.
You the sort of the analogy or the metaphor that has emerged on this show is that of like a furnace and a fire. Because I had a guest recently ask me, they're like, I don't get this whole polarity thing. It was a very interesting. It was a very interesting conversation because they sort of came from a different mindset than I think both you and I share. And I said the easiest way I can explain it is it's like a fire in a furnace. If the fire melts the furnace, that's no good. Like the fire can't be so strong that it melts the furnace, and the furnace can't be so overbearing that it stomps out the fire. It actually requires both of those energies to create something useful. When you have a fire without the furnace, it burns out. There's no direction to it, but you give that structure, and all of a sudden the two can actually create something.